2:30 a.m. at a McDonald's by the highway. The fluorescent lights buzzed, and the parking lot hummed with distant truck engines. I remember the exact creak of the front door because it sounded wrong that night. I was 21 and had worked graveyard shifts for most of college. I did the register, the trays, the drive-through window when things got busy, and I knew how nights could drift into quiet and then snap. A man walked straight past the menu board and went to the bathroom without ordering. He came back out and said in a low voice, "The stall is leaking, come look." I felt my stomach drop. I smiled and said I would call a manager. My hands were suddenly cold and sweaty. What followed in the next few minutes changed how I moved through McDonald's for years. I will tell you 5 of the worst things that happened to me across different nights in different towns and why a single decision once saved my life. I will name the people who were there, what we smelled and heard, and how the cameras and the police reacted, because every one of these stories left a mark. I grew up in a small town where the nearest mall was 20 minutes away, and the first job I got was at a McDonald's when I was 18. My dad had worked nights his whole life, so he taught me how to stay awake, how to keep my eyes moving, how to be polite even when my bones ached. I needed the money for tuition and for gas to get to campus, and nights made sense because they paid a little more and the managers were less strict about attendance. My first manager was Rob, a man with a laugh that sounded like a can of soda popping open. Rob taught me to count the drawer, to look at the cameras before making a call, and to never go alone to the storage room after midnight. After Rob left, Maria took over. Maria was small and quick and had a way of staring at people that made them think twice about messing with the place. I worked with Heather, who could steam milk with nothing to touch the pitcher, with Jamal, who kept a stack of napkins as though it were a shield, with Greg, who fixed the deep fryer and knew the code for the alarm, with Tanya, who managed the late shift schedules, and with Officer Lopez from the county, who would swing by sometimes during a patrol. My boyfriend at the time, Connor, thought I was dramatic about late shifts. My grandmother warned me that night jobs changed the way a person heard silence. All of that shaped me. I was careful because I had to be. I had a habit of telling the truth plainly, and I learned to trust the small, uneasy feeling that sits under your ribs when something is off. That backstory is not a preface. It is the reason I did not laugh off things that would have scared other people away. The first story happened at the highway McDonald's where I started. Sensory details stay with you. The kitchen smelled like old grease and orange disinfectant. The counter felt sticky under my palms from syrup that never quite cleaned away. The light above the soda fountain flicked in a pattern I could count off in my head. The man who went to the bathroom had boots that squeaked when he walked and a coat that smelled faintly like gasoline. The sound of his voice when he said, "Come see," was soft but deliberate. I remember the way the tile under my shoes had a small chip near the door and how my shoulder blade prickled as if someone had run a finger across it. I told Jamal at the grill what happened. Jamal shrugged and said, "Maybe the pipes are old." I said, "He said, 'Come see.'" Jamal looked over his shoulder. "Did he say it to you?" I nodded. Heather, who was washing down the coffee machine, said, "Call Rob." I replied, "Rob is on his way, but he's 20 minutes away." Jamal said, "You should not go by yourself." I answered, "I am not going." Heather said, "Lock the bathroom door from the outside until he leaves." Jamal said, "Get the camera footage if anything happens." I said, "I already checked the camera once. The angle is bad by the stalls." Those 6 quick exchanges felt like a small raft in water. We stayed by the counter. The man stared at me through the glass for a long second and then left. He did not speak to the manager, he did not order, he just left. That night we tightened procedures. We put a sign on the bathroom, and the manager, Rob, later told me he would file a complaint if the man returned. The sting of adrenaline that night made my hands tremble for 30 minutes. The second story was less immediate but more insidious. It was the city McDonald's by the university. It was a bright afternoon with students slouched over study guides, the air conditioner rattling, a lemon cleaner smell undercut by hot fries. A woman sat in the corner booth for a long time, watching. I noticed because she had a notebook with pages folded down, as if she had a map of the room. She would tilt it slightly and mark things with a pencil. She made the same movement for 3 hours. When I dropped off coffee, she said, "Do you work here often?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I like this booth." I said, "You can stay." She said, "Do you close?" I said, "Sometimes." She said, "What do you do to protect yourself when no one is around?" I said, "I try to keep my phone on me and stay near the register." She smiled and said, "Good." The smile was slow. Later that night, the same woman returned at closing time, but not alone. 2 men waited in the car. The woman stood and walked right by me and said, "We will be back later." I felt the hairs on my arms stand straight up. I told Tanya at the office area and she said, "Write down everything." I said, "Should we call security?" She said, "We will watch the doors." We watched. The 2 men circled the block but did not enter. They honked a horn once. That honk made the fluorescent lights seem harsher. We called Officer Lopez the next morning when the manager filed a complaint. Officer Lopez took the report and asked for video. The footage showed them driving past, but because the shots were compressed, you could not see license plates clearly. We tried to tighten the lighting and asked for extra patrols. The woman never came back, but the knowledge that someone had scoped the place slowed me down for months. I altered my routes to the bus stop and started leaving with coworkers. At about a third of the way through these stories, I want to pause and say something to you directly. If you have ever felt a cold hole open up under your ribs and your brain tried to give you options that did not make sense in the moment, you are not alone. Me telling you this feels like handing you a small lantern in a dark hallway. Now I need a favor that is both simple and important. If you have ever made a split-second choice in public because you felt unsafe, tell me in the comments. Start your comment with, "I froze," or "I ran," so I know how you reacted. If you felt like you did not know what to do, write "confused." Your comments help others feel less alone, and they build a small collective manual of things that work. I will read and highlight some of the best answers in a future video, and we will talk about practical things you can do. Community matters here because a single detail someone mentions could change how another person acts. Now back to the stories. The third story is where things got physical and where my training mattered. It was in a small-town McDonald's that smelled of bleach and damp paper, late on a Friday when college kids had been coming through after bars closed. We had a regular, an older man named Mr. Parker, who always asked for extra salt and sat by the window. He had a quiet nod for everyone. One night, Mr. Parker left his drink in his jacket at his table and went outside. A younger man sat down in his place and began to rummage through the jacket. I walked over and said, "Excuse me, that belongs to Mr. Parker." The man looked up and said, "He is not using it." I said, "That is not yours." The man said, "Why are you sticking your nose in?" I said, "Because he asked me to watch it." The man stood up in a way that filled the space like a balloon pushing out. He took a step toward me. I felt my mouth go dry and my vision narrow. I said, "Back up." He said, "You do not get to order me." I said, "I am calling the manager." He said, "Do it." I called Rob on the phone and then told Jamal to call the local dispatcher because the man was refusing to leave. When Jamal pressed 9 and then 911, the line was busy, and the night dispatcher said they were on another call. I had to defuse the situation for 7 minutes while the man kept inching closer. That 7 minutes included these exchanges. I said, "Please give the jacket back." He said, "You people always poke your noses in other people's business." I said, "This jacket is not yours." He said, "Who are you to tell me that?" I said, "I work here." He said, "Then do your job and leave me alone." I said, "I will not let you take his things." He said, "Fine." He grabbed the jacket and went outside. I remember the gravel under his feet and the smell of winter air when he left. The tension of that moment later landed in a bigger way because he came back at closing and banged on the glass like he wanted us to look out at him. That banging sounded like an animal hitting against a cage. We locked the doors early that night, and Rob called it into the log. The police came in the morning to check the footage. Now I will describe a police process so you understand what happens after you make a report. When you call the non-emergency line, an officer notes the time of call and asks for names and a description of the suspect. The officer will request camera footage, which the manager has to export from the system and hand over on a USB drive or through an online upload. The footage is logged, cataloged, and entered into the incident report. If the footage is low quality, the officer will still file the report but will add limitations to their probable cause information. A detective may be assigned depending on severity, and the store will be advised to preserve physical evidence and maintain visitor logs. It is not instantaneous, but it creates a paper trail that can be used later if there are repeat incidents. That process felt bureaucratic and cold the first time, but it was the thing that let Officer Lopez cross-reference a license plate 3 months later. The fourth story is the one that most people call creepy because it has no clear motive, just repetition. A man started coming in at 2:30 a.m. every Sunday and sitting at the same table. He would eat a small bag of fries and stare at the exit. At first, we thought he was a trucker who liked routine. Then staff started to notice patterns. He would tap his fingers in the same rhythm, he would leave the ketchup unevenly smeared on the tabletop, and he would trace a shape on a napkin that looked like a map. Once, I walked in to take out the trash and found a small paper doll pinned under the sugar dispenser. It was folded strangely and had the eyes drawn out. I picked it up and felt a small prickle at the base of my neck. I took it to Tanya and she said, "What is that?" I said, "I do not know." Tanya said, "This is getting weird." Jamal said, "We should not touch it." Heather said, "We should put it in evidence until the manager sees it." We put it in a bag and locked it in the office safe and noted the time. That evening, we had 8 exchanges with the manager about whether to discard it or keep it. I said, "Keep it." Rob said, "Maybe it is nothing." Jamal said, "Maybe someone is trying to freak us out." Heather said, "But who would fold it like that?" Tanya said, "If it keeps happening, we call Lopez." Rob said, "We will watch and only open the safe with 2 people present." Those decisions felt small at the time. The man continued to come weekly for 3 months. Once, when it was only me on shift, the man stood and walked toward the restroom and knocked on the stall. He called out, "You in there?" in a voice like the inside of a pipe. My hands vibrated. I did not answer, and he left. That was the first real time I felt chased by a pattern rather than a person. Moment of tension 1 occurred when the man at the highway McDonald's blocked the back door during a power outage. We had a storm, and the lights went out in flashes, and the emergency exit light buzzed like a trapped insect. He leaned against the door and said, "You are not supposed to be here alone." I said, "I work here." He said, "Not at night." The sound of rain on the roof made everything hollow. I felt a pressure in my chest like someone was pressing an elbow into my sternum, and the tick of the register clock stretched into a long second. The room smelled like burnt sugar and wet cardboard. I remember touching the counter and feeling it reluctantly cool my palm. That moment lasted less than a minute, but felt like a small universe of possibility. I called out for Jamal and he answered from the fryer area. The man left when he realized help could come. It taught me that small noises become huge when you are on edge. That moment of tension stayed with me for months and made me check the locks every time. The sky darkened. The 5th and last story is the one people ask me about most because it ends in a near miss. It was at a McDonald's attached to a gas station on the interstate where the layout had a narrow corridor between the bathrooms and the storage area. I was closing that night with Greg and Heather, and Rob had already left for home. A man came in who smelled like cigarettes and old coffee. He asked for directions to the restroom, and then, after I pointed, he said, "You do not have to be scared of me, you know." I said, "I am not scared." He said, "But you look it." I said, "I am just tired." He smiled in a way that did not include his eyes. He left and then came back with a paper cup and placed it on the counter. He said, "I left something in there for you." In that moment, my skin felt oily and my throat closed. I asked Greg to step forward. Greg said, "What did you leave?" The man said, "A note." Heather said, "We do not accept things left by strangers." The man said, "You should not be so uptight." Greg said, "Sir, please leave." The man said, "Fine." Then he turned and walked toward the restroom. The exchange of words was quick but hard. We followed store protocol and did not go into the restroom alone. I asked Heather to call the manager. Heather said, "He is not answering." I said, "Call the police." Heather hesitated because the store had a long number for non-emergency and the immediate line for the county was busy. She called the local precinct instead. The man was in the stall for a long time. My heartbeat hit the back of my throat. I remember the metallic smell of the condiment caddy and the click of a distant cash register. The man opened the door and walked out looking like any other traveler. We found the cup on the counter with a folded napkin inside. Inside the napkin was a sketch of the layout of the store and a red dot marked by the restroom. The hair at my neck lifted. I told Rob in the morning and he said, "We should not have to work like that." We kept the napkin and handed it to Officer Lopez when she next came by. That napkin is probably the reason the whole situation escalated to a formal investigation later when another theft happened nearby. Moment of tension, too, was the 7 minutes during which the man refused to leave Mr. Parker's jacket. I will describe those minutes because they show how time stretches under threat. The fluorescent hum became a physical wall. My palms sweated against the counter, and the coffee steam blurred the edges of my vision. The jukebox from the corner of the restaurant played a muffled pop song and then skipped to silence when the man slammed his alarm key. Fist on a table. My breathing narrowed to small sips. I remembered my father's voice telling me to count to 10 and breath. I chose words that were flat and short and repeated them like a litany. Every time the man answered, it was a ripple through the room. When he finally left, the echo of his footsteps came back slow and distant, like someone walking away from a cliff. That whole stretch measured roughly 500 to 600 characters in memory and felt like a year. After the napkin, the manager insisted on reporting everything. We followed procedures for handing evidence to the police. Officer Lopez arrived to take statements. She used a standard form which asked for date and time, description, witness names, and any immediate threats. She explained the chain of custody for the napkin and the paper doll. She documented that we had locked the safe and kept the items untouched until a representative could collect them. Officer Lopez scheduled a follow-up and advised us to install better coverage on the camera angles. Her calm voice felt like a rope. This procedural description ran about 300 characters in my recollection, but it mattered because it turned a story into a record. Moment of tension 3 was the man who came weekly and tapped his fingers in a map rhythm. One night, he used the restroom, and I heard the stall lock click 3 times in an odd cadence that matched his finger taps. The corridor smelled like spilled fry oil and lemon cleaner, and my knees felt like cotton. I slid the security tray under the door with a pen and a small note asking, "Are you okay?" He answered by knocking back twice, then silence. My phone vibrated in my pocket from an incoming text, and it sounded like thunder. The man opened the door and looked straight at me as if he had been expecting a different person. His eyes were not angry, only tired. He left without a word. That short exchange contained a string of sensations, and it occupied about 500 to 600 characters in the raw record of the night. After these events, we took measures. We changed staffing patterns so that no one had to be alone in the late hours. Rob insisted on 2 people in the front at night. We added a logbook at the counter for suspicious vehicles and faces. We taped a protocol sheet behind the register that said who to call and where to lock things. We installed a secondary camera pointed at the booths and the bathroom corridor, and we tested uploads every week. Officer Lopez helped us push for a small motion sensor light that greeted anyone who approached the restroom door. We also tightened incident reporting and made sure the manager would call the non-emergency line immediately when someone refused to leave. The small changes made us feel safer, but did not erase the memory. 1 month later, the community reacted in a way that felt like small ripples turning into waves. Word had gotten out through social media, and a neighborhood group posted that our location had several odd incidents. People started dropping in for coffee earlier, and some older regulars, like Mrs. Parker and a woman named Alana who worked nights at the hospital, offered to sit closer to the doors. The manager installed a sign at the bathroom that said "out of order" as a placeholder protocol, and the county did a slow patrol increase for 1 week. That month, I found myself checking the locks 3 times, even when I was leaving during daylight, and I had trouble walking past the booth that the regular used for his small bag of fries. The feeling of being watched had not left. 3 months later, Officer Lopez called to say there had been a similar report at another McDonald's 15 miles away. She asked if we had the napkin sketch still and if we could export footage from the week the man had sat at the booth. We dug through the archive, exported what we could, and the files were sent to the department. They matched a vehicle seen on a highway camera, and a name came up in a county file. The detective who followed the lead thanked us for keeping the small items. He explained that sometimes the connection is simple, and sometimes it takes months for patterns to align. 3 months later, I felt less jumpy entering the building, but I still walked with my keys between my knuckles as a habit. 6 months later, the place had changed permanently. New locks, new cameras, and a different sense of rhythm. The manager shifted closing times, and the corporate rep did a safety audit. Our little rituals became routine safety checks. Some regulars stopped coming, and some came more often. I had changed too. I left graveyard shifts, took a morning job on campus, and learned to trust that small internal alarm bell. The community put pressure on local officials, and the county provided a small grant for lighting in the parking lot. Officer Lopez stopped by less often because the incidents decreased. The napkin and the paper doll remained in a labeled evidence bag in municipal storage, and the odd man who tapped weekly was never apprehended, but his pattern broke after a new cleaner started working nights. 6 months later, I could say the place did not feel haunted in the same way, but the memory of those nights lingered like the aftertaste of too much coffee. I want to close by saying something direct. I still pass by McDonald's, and I still see the stains on the floor, and I feel a small hitch in my chest. I still keep my phone in my hand when I walk across a parking lot late at night, and I still prefer to leave with another person if I can. The consequences were practical. We filed reports, installed cameras, changed shifts, and got the manager to push corporate for better lighting. The police process meant completing reports, exporting footage, and preserving evidence. That paperwork felt tedious, but it allowed the county to see the pattern, and it gave Officer Lopez a lead that helped prevent a similar incident elsewhere. If you have a story like this, please share it below, starting with "I froze" or "I ran." Your words can help someone else notice the small premonitions that matter. If you want more stories like this and details about how to act, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you do not miss the next one, where I will break down tangible safety steps and interview a security expert. Most importantly, remember this final line: small instincts are loud when you are quiet. Listen.